Alright, hello Algebra 2 students, this is Mr. Hotard. Today's lesson, we're going to be doing three things. We're going to be still solving quadratic equations like what we were doing with factoring, but instead of factoring, we're going to be looking at how can we solve them by graphing using our graphing calculators. We're also going to be reviewing something that you learned in Algebra 1 and in geometry, simplifying radicals and then using that to solve quadratic equations using the square root method. So we're going to start with solving by graphing, all right? If instead of factoring, if you want a quick way to find the solution to these quadratic equations using your graphing calculator, you want to make sure the equation is equal to 0. All right, if it doesn't equal 0, get it equal 0. Then you graph it and you look for the x-intercepts. You look for where that graph touches the x-axis. So for example, the first problem, x squared minus x equals 6. All right, I need to get that equal to 0. I would subtract 6 from both sides. So that would now say x squared minus x minus 6 equal to 0. So now I'm going to use my graphing calculator to graph this. Right, turn it on. I'm going to go to y equals up at the top left-hand corner. And I'm going to type this in. Don't worry about the equal 0. Just type this in, x squared. Now the x button right here next to the alpha button. X squared minus x minus 6. And then I want to graph that. So just make sure I'm resetting my graph so I'm not zoomed out or anything. Also, one other thing before I forget to tell you, make sure all these plots are turned off. Okay, if any of these are highlighted, like if you have plot 1 highlighted, then you want to go up to it and just hit enter, turn that off. And then I'm going to hit zoom 6 just to reset my graph. And there's my graph of my parabola. I'm just looking where it touches the x-axis. All right, looks like it's touching right here at -2 and at +3. So those answers for number 1 would be x equals -2, x equals +3. Those are the same answers I'd get if I factored it. So I'm going to do this second one right here, x squared minus 144. I'm going to go to y equals x squared minus 144. And then if I hit zoom 6. Now, I'm not seeing a graph. Why do you think that is? Well, this is such a big number, it's not fitting on my graph. So I need to zoom out. I'm going to hit the zoom button, and then 3 is to zoom out. So zoom 3, and then you have to hit enter. So that's going to zoom me out. Now I can see at least part of my graph, the part I need. It's got to cross right here and right here, but it's zoomed out so far, it's hard to see what those numbers are. If you just use your left arrow, all right, put that tick mark as close to that spot as we can get it. We can kind of get an estimate right there. If you look down here, it looks like somewhere around -11.8, -12. It's going to be -12. And then same thing if I go over here to the right. All right, looks like it's somewhere around 11.8, 12.12. It's going to be about +12. So your answers here are going to be x equals positive and -12. That's where it touched the x-axis. That's the same answers we get if we factor that. All right, so that can help you, especially when you take an ACT. That's sort of a quick way to get the answers if you don't want to sit there and try to figure out the factors. Now, next part of this lesson, simplifying radicals. You need to remember something called perfect squares. These are numbers like 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64. Are you seeing the pattern? 1 times 1 gives you 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4, 5 times 5. 6 times 6, 7 times 7, 8 times 8. So what would be the next one? 9 times 9, 81. 10 times 10 is 100. 11 times 11, 121. 12 times 12, 144. And they keep going on and on and on. All right, but these are the main ones I'm going to use. Really, 100 and below are kind of the main ones I want to stick to. So these are special because I can take the square root of these numbers. So for example, what's the square root of 49? It'd be 7, because 7 times 7 gives you 49. Square root of 36 would be 6, because 6 times 6 gives you 36. So if I needed to know the square root of 27, now 27 is not a perfect square number. In fact, if you try to type that in your calculator, if you type square root, second square root button, 27, it's going to be a decimal number. I don't want that decimal number. All right, I want an exact answer. I want to simplify that. So I want to write this in terms of a perfect square. So I can split up 27 into one of these perfect square numbers times something. What times what gives you 27? When you use one of these perfect square numbers, I could split it up into 9 and something. 9 times what? 9 and 3. So this is like saying square root of 9 times the square root of 3. Now what's the square root of 9? That's 3. So that answer is going to be 3 square root of 3. I don't have a square root of 3, so I'll just leave that as square root of 3. If you look at the second one, square root of 200. I want to try to split that up into one of these. All right, so I know I could split that up into 100 and something. So 200, I could split that up into 100 times what? Times 2. Now what's the square root of 100? What times itself gives you 100? 10. So that simplifies down to 10 square root of 2. And then the last one, 32, there's actually 2 ways to do this. All right, if I split that up, looking at these numbers, I want to split it up into one of these times something. You always want to try to use the biggest number you can. So I can split 32 up into 16 times 2. So I can split that up into square root of 16 times the square root of 2. And what's the square root of 16? It'd be 4. So that answer would be 4 square root of 2. Now you may have thought, hey, instead of 16, you may have thought, hey, let's use 4 in something. All right, if I were to do that, 4 times what gives you 32? 4 times 8. So yes, I could have just split up 32 into square root of 4 times the square root of 8. What's the square root of 4? It'd be 2. I'd have 2 square root of 8. But if I did it that way, I could split 8 up again into one of these perfect square numbers. I could split 8 up into what times what? 4 times 2. All right, so I'd split that up into square root of 4, square root of 2. And square root of 4 is what? 2 square root of 2. But then I'd also have this 2 in the front that I would have to bring down, and I'd have to multiply by it. So that answer would be 4 square root of 2. So you get the same thing, but it's much easier if you use the bigger perfect square number. So that answer is going to be 4 square root of 2. All right, so now we're going to be using that in order to solve these quadratic equations. All right, these problems right here, now we've been solving by factoring and solving using our graphing calculator. I'm going to show you one other method. This is called the square root method. This only works for these type of problems. So you notice how many x's are in these problems? Just 1. If you just have an x squared, not like x squared plus something x, then you could use the square root method. You're just solving for x. You get an x by itself. So if I add 9, I got x squared equals 9. How do you get rid of that square? You take the square root. And what's the square root of 9? It's 3. Now here's where people make a mistake. A lot of people want to say, okay, x equals 3. That's only half the answer. Because yes, 3 squared gives you 9, but there's another number that if you square it, it gives you 9. It's negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 will also give you 9. So when you take the square root of both sides, you need to put a plus and minus on that. That just means that both of these numbers, positive and negative 3, are answers to this equation. X equals plus or minus 3. All right, so example 2 over here, I want to get x by itself. I would add the 9. Got 3x squared equal to 9. What would you do next to get x by itself? You divide by 3. So x squared equals 3. And then take the square root. Now, is there a square root of 3? No, there is not. And I can't simplify it, so my answer would be x equals plus or minus the square root of 3. All right, next one, I want to get x by itself. So what would be your first step here? I would add 31 plus 31. So cancel that. 4x squared going to equal 49 plus 31. That's 80. Now I would divide by the 4. X squared equals 20. And then I would take the square root. And a lot of people want to say, okay, the answer could be x equals plus or minus square root of 20. First of all, can you take the square root of 20? No, you cannot, but you can split it up like what we did here. I could split 20 into what times what? And use 4. 4 times 5. This is like square root of 4 times the square root of 5. And what's the square root of 4? It's 2. So that answer will be x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 5. All right, one last one. This one right here, it's a little bit different. When you're solving for x, you start with whatever's furthest away from x and get the x by itself. So what's the first thing I would get rid of? The minus 1. So I would add the 1. 49 plus 1 gonna give me 50. So 2 parentheses x plus 3 squared equals 50. Now, a lot of people want to distribute that 2, but that's not right because there's a squared here. You cannot distribute the 2. This is 2 times all this stuff. How do you get rid of that 2? You divide by it, both sides. Divide by that 2, going to give you x plus 3 squared equal to, what's 50 divided by 2? 25. Now, I need to get rid of plus 3 and I need to get rid of the squared. Which one's further from x? The squared, so I'm going to get rid of that next. I'm going to take the square root. And what's the square root of 25? It's 5. So I'm getting x plus 3 equals, don't forget, when you take the square root method, how many answers you get? You get 2 answers, plus or minus 5. All right, so now, when I get x by itself, I still have one more step. I got to subtract 3. I'm going to get 2 separate answers, and it's not just going to be plus or minus the same number. I'm solving x plus 3 equal to positive 5, and x plus 3 equal to negative 5. And be 2 separate answers. Because when I subtract 3, I'm going to get x equals 2. I'm not going to get negative 2 here. Because when I subtract 3, what's negative 5 minus 3? That's negative 8. So my answer is this time positive 2, negative 8. So main things to remember, square root method, you only use this method when you have how many x's in the problem? Just one x. If you have 2 or more x's, you're not going to be able to use square root method. You're going to have to use factoring or graphic calculator or some other method. And then square root method always gives you 2 answers. Don't forget that plus and minus. All right, peace out.